Harrison. Oh, seriously. Couldn't resist. You're paying for this.
He walked into that precinct on day one with a medal, a mission, and 8 years of military service behind him. They welcomed him with a hand-drawn cartoon taped inside his locker. He folded it up, put it in his pocket, and smiled. They had absolutely no idea what they had just started. Marcus Coleman was 34 years old the first time he walked through the doors of the Riverdale precinct in uniform. Not as a suspect. Not as a visitor filling out some form in the waiting area. As an officer, badge on his chest, name tag aligned perfectly, creases on his uniform sharp enough to cut glass. This was his moment, the one he had been working toward for years, and he was going to walk into it like he owned every single inch of that floor. Let's back up for a second, because this story does not make sense without knowing who Marcus Coleman actually was. 8 years in the United States Army, 2 tours in Afghanistan, a combat action medal that sat in a wooden box on his mother's dresser because she refused to put it anywhere less honorable, a scar on his left forearm, a thin, curved line about 3 inches long that he never explained to anyone, not even his closest friends. He had earned that scar in a place where the temperature hit 115 degrees before noon, and he had come home from that place standing on his own 2 feet, which was more than some of his brothers could say. He did not talk about that either. After the army, most guys drifted. Marcus had a plan. He applied to the New York City Police Academy, sat through every exam, every physical, every psychological evaluation. Out of 120 cadets in his graduating class, he finished third. Third. Not because he got lucky, not because someone handed him anything, because he studied until his eyes burned, ran until his legs gave out, and showed up every single day without exception. His instructors called him disciplined. His fellow cadets called him intense. Both were correct. He could have gone anywhere. The department had openings across all 5 boroughs, but Marcus requested Riverdale, a neighborhood in the northern Bronx where he grew up, where he learned to ride a bike on Fieldston Road, where his mother, Dorothy Coleman, 61 years old and a school nurse for 23 years, still lived in the same apartment they had shared since he was 7. He wanted to serve in a place that meant something, a place where the faces on the street were familiar, a place where his presence would actually matter to people who had known him before the badge. That was the idea. Anyway, the precinct smelled like burnt coffee and regret. That is not an exaggeration. The moment Marcus pushed through the front door, the smell hit him like a wall. Stale, bitter. The kind of coffee that had been sitting on a burner since approximately the previous administration. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed at a frequency that made everyone look slightly unwell, casting the whole lobby in a pale, greenish glow. The kind of lighting that belongs in a horror movie, not a place where people come seeking justice. The desk sergeant glanced up from behind the counter. His name was Brad Collins, 47 years old, with a face that looked like it had been left in hot water for too long. Pale, puffy, slightly red around the edges. His mustache was the kind of thick, heavy, aggressively styled mustache that peaked sometime around 1994 and simply never left. He looked at Marcus the way people look at a package that got delivered to the wrong address. Confused, mildly irritated, and already planning to send it somewhere else. "Coleman?" Collins said, squinting at the paper in front of him like the name personally offended him. "Yes, sir. Officer Marcus Coleman, reporting for duty." Collins made a sound somewhere between a grunt and a sigh, drew a check mark on the paper, and pointed down the hallway without making eye contact. "Locker rooms at the end. Your locker's number 28. Briefing in 30 minutes. No handshake. No, welcome to the team. No, glad to have you. Just a check mark on a clipboard, like Marcus was a piece of equipment being logged into inventory, rather than a human being who had just sworn an oath to protect people's lives. Marcus stood there for exactly half a second, long enough to register the complete absence of basic human decency, and then kept moving. All right, he thought. Cool. That's how we're doing this. The locker room had 3 occupants when Marcus pushed open the door. Dave Pierce, 31, was built like someone had stacked 2 refrigerators on top of each other and given them a badge. Blonde, thick-necked, with a laugh that filled a room whether you wanted it to or not. He was watching something on his phone and cracking up at his own reaction, completely unbothered by the arrival of another human being. Randy Schultz, 29, was the opposite. Wiry and restless, with eyes that moved constantly, scanning everything, like he was always calculating an exit route. He had the energy of someone who had been nervous their whole life, but had learned to disguise it as alertness. And then there was Craig Hoffman, 42, senior shift officer. Hoffman had one of those faces that looked like it had never once in its entire existence produced a genuine smile, not just resting serious, anatomically incapable of warmth. His eyes were the gray of old concrete, and when he looked at you, it felt less like being seen and more like being assessed for structural weaknesses. Marcus stepped in, scanned the room, and gave a clean nod. Officer Coleman, first day. Pierce lifted his eyes from his phone, did a full top-to-bottom sweep of Marcus, the kind of look that takes in everything and gives back nothing, and dropped his gaze right back to the screen. 0 words. Not even an acknowledgement that a person had spoken. Schultz muttered something under his breath. It was quiet enough to be deniable, loud enough to be intentional. Hoffman looked at Marcus for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to make it clear the silence was a choice, not an oversight. Then he turned back to his locker. Marcus walked to locker 28 and opened it. There was a piece of paper taped to the inside of the mirror. Hand-drawn, red marker. A stick figure in a police uniform, dark shading on the face, with a caption written in thick capital letters underneath. Diversity Hire of the Month. Marcus stood there and read it once, took a slow breath. Then he peeled it carefully off the mirror, folded it into quarters, and slid it into his breast pocket. Not the trash, his pocket. Creative bunch, he said out loud, to no one in particular and everyone in general. Behind him, Pierce laughed. The morning briefing happened in a large room with outdated boards and a wall-mounted map of the precinct's patrol area. Captain Frank Davis, 53 years old, ran it, square jaw, medal ribbons on his dress uniform, the economy of words that belongs to men who have been in charge long enough to stop explaining themselves. He was the only person in that room who shook Marcus's hand like a human being. Firm, direct, no hesitation. His eyes were sharp but not hostile, the eyes of someone who had seen everything and stopped being surprised by most of it a long time ago. "Coleman, you're on patrol with Pierce today," Davis said. "He'll show you the area." At the table next to Marcus, Pierce closed his eyes slowly. The expression on his face was that of a man who had just been told something truly terrible. Not dramatic, not angry, just deeply, quietly resigned. Like he had been handed a situation he considered beneath him and lacked the energy to protest out loud. And so it begins, Marcus thought. Dude really had the audacity to look personally victimized by my existence. The first patrol was a masterpiece of uncomfortable silence. Pierce drove. He kept both hands on the wheel, eyes straight ahead, jaw set, and did not produce a single syllable for the first 11 minutes. Marcus was not the type to be rattled by silence. He had sat through 12-hour overnight watches in conditions considerably less comfortable than a patrol car. But this particular silence had texture. It had weight. It was the kind of silence that is louder than most conversations. Marcus looked out the window at the neighborhood scrolling past. He knew these streets, that corner store on Kingsbridge, where he used to buy a corner bag of chips after school. The park on 238th, where the older guys ran pickup games every Saturday morning from April through November. The elementary school where his mother had given flu shots to hundreds of kids over 23 years, including him when he was 9 and convinced he was going to be the first person in history to actually die from a vaccine. These were his streets. He knew them better than he knew most people. "You from around here?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice easy. "Westchester," Pierce said. "Long drive every day." "Long drive every day," Pierce repeated, with the exact flat tone that communicates. "This conversation is over. I will not be expanding on that. Do not try again." That escalated quickly, Marcus thought. Or rather, it did not escalate at all. It just stayed on the ground and refused to get up. On the way back, a call came in. Alarm triggered at a small grocery on Grand Concourse. Turned out to be a sensor malfunction. Standard stuff. They pulled up, and the owner, an older Puerto Rican man named Raul Estrada, 68 years old, came out to meet them. When he saw Marcus step out of the car, his whole face changed. Not suspicion, not confusion. Recognition. Real, warm, genuine recognition. "Finally," Estrada said, spreading his hands, "somebody actually from around here." Marcus blinked. "You know me, sir?" "You're Dorothy's son." The old man grabbed Marcus's hand with both of his, the kind of handshake that is also partially a hug. "I've known you since you were 7 years old, young man. You used to come in here and try to negotiate the price of a Snickers bar." He laughed. "I'm glad you're here. We need people who actually know this neighborhood." Marcus felt something loosen slightly in his chest, a small, specific relief, the kind you feel when at least one thing in a confusing day makes complete sense. Pierce stood 3 feet away, with the expression of a man forced to witness something that disagreed with him on a molecular level. Arms crossed, jaw tight, watching the exchange like it was personally offensive to him that Marcus Coleman had a history in this neighborhood, and people who were happy to see him. End of shift. Marcus was at his locker, changing back into civilian clothes, when Hoffman appeared beside him. He didn't look at Marcus. He addressed the middle distance somewhere around the lockers with the tone of someone delivering a piece of corporate policy. Practiced, controlled, designed to sound neutral while communicating something very specific. "Hey, Coleman, we have a culture here. You're new. You're not local in the way that matters. Best thing you can do is stay in your lane." Marcus pulled his jacket off the hook, turned to face Hoffman. "I'm more local than anyone in this building," he said, keeping his voice level. "I grew up 2 blocks from here. My mother has worked in this neighborhood for 23 years. I know the name of every business owner on this street." Hoffman finally looked at him, held the gaze for a moment, then turned and walked out without another word. Marcus stood there, reached into his breast pocket, unfolded the paper from the mirror, looked at it one more time and put it back. Not in the trash, not in the garbage. Back in his pocket. Some things you keep. The next morning Marcus showed up for his shift in full regulation uniform. And a cap. Dark navy blue. Clean stitching. On the front, in neat white letters, MIGA, Make It Great Again for the Community. He had it made at a print shop on Grand Avenue for $12. It was a riff on a phrase the neighborhood kids had been using for a couple of years, a local remix of a popular slogan, stripped of any political meaning and redirected at their own block. Make the neighborhood great again. Take care of your own. Show up for your community. That was the whole message. Marcus put the cap on, walked into the locker room and said, "Good morning." Pierce turned around, saw the cap, and laughed. Loud, sudden. The kind of laugh that's not actually about humor. Schultz flinched at the sound. "You're serious right now?" Pierce managed, still grinning. "You actually came in here with that on." "With what on?" Marcus asked, genuinely calm. "With that." Pierce gestured vaguely at the hat, apparently unable to finish the sentence. settling instead for the universal hand signal for "Are you out of your mind?" Schultz let out a quiet snicker. Hoffman, standing at his locker across the room, turned around slowly, looked at the cap, looked at Marcus, and then spoke, not loudly, not aggressively, but quietly. Precisely. Which was somehow far more unsettling than if he had shouted, "Take it off. Civilian headwear is unrestricted until we step outside the building," Marcus replied. "Nothing in the uniform code addresses personal items in the locker room before duty. I said take it off. Find me the specific regulation and I'll follow it." Hoffman took one step forward. Marcus did not move. Not a single inch. He stood exactly where he was, feet shoulder-width apart, hands relaxed at his sides, and held Hoffman's gaze the way he had been trained to hold his position under pressure, completely still, completely present. The room was dead quiet. 4 seconds passed. They felt like 4 years. Then Hoffman turned around and walked out. Pierce stared at Marcus with an expression that was equal parts disbelief and something that might have been the very early stages of genuine respect. Buried under a thick layer of hostility, it wasn't ready to give up yet. "You're out of your mind," Pierce said. "Maybe," Marcus agreed, and turned back to his locker. "Good morning, by the way." He closed the door. The cap stayed on his head. Day 2 had officially begun. The next 3 weeks at the Riverdale precinct were what Marcus Coleman privately called the silent war. No screaming, no direct confrontations, no dramatic showdowns in the hallway that anybody could point to and say, "Yeah, that right there. That was the moment." Nothing that obvious, nothing that clean. Instead, what Marcus got was something far more calculated, a steady, relentless campaign of small, surgical humiliations, each one individually deniable, collectively devastating. The kind of thing that makes a reasonable person start questioning their own perception of reality. That was the whole point. It started with the paperwork, because of course it did. Marcus submitted his incident reports the same way every officer was supposed to the front desk, logged, signed, filed. Standard procedure, except his reports had a habit of disappearing. He would turn in a report on a Tuesday, come back Wednesday, and discover it had never been registered in the system. No record of submission, no explanation, just gone. So Marcus adapted. He started keeping carbon copies. He documented every submission with a timestamp, logged the name of whoever received the report, and followed up in writing. Reports that had gone missing would suddenly reappear, but always late. Late enough to qualify, on paper, as a procedural delay on his part. Late enough to create a paper trail that looked like incompetence if you didn't know the full story. "Oh, that is genuinely clever," Marcus thought one evening, staring at the third late notation on his file. Not smart. Clever. There's a difference. At briefings, he learned to time his contributions by the silence that followed them. He would make an observation, solid, relevant, backed by what he had actually seen on patrol, and the room would go quiet. Not the productive kind of quiet where people are considering an idea. The other kind. The kind that is manufactured to communicate one very specific message. What you just said does not exist. Then, 30 seconds later, Pierce or Schultz would say essentially the same thing with different words, and Captain Davis would nod and move on. Marcus documented those moments too. Date, time, subject, exact words. He had a small notebook in his breast pocket, and he wrote in it with the same discipline he had brought to field logs in Afghanistan. If someone was building a case against him, he was going to make sure he was building a better one. In the patrol car, Pierce had discovered that the simplest weapon was also the most effective: volume. He kept the radio at a level that made conversation physically impossible, without shouting over it, which neither of them was going to do. It was not rude enough to file a complaint about. It was not loud enough to constitute a violation of anything. It was just loud. Constantly, persistently, deliberately loud. This dude really said, Marcus thought on the 4th day of the radio treatment, I'm going to win this argument by turning up the Springsteen. Fine. Marcus looked out the window at the neighborhood and thought about the people on those streets instead. But the radio was nothing. The paperwork was nothing. Day 4 was where the mask came off. The call came in at 2:47 in the afternoon. Domestic disturbance. 14 Oak Street, 2nd floor. Marcus arrived first. He pushed through the front door of the building, took the stairs 2 at a time, and knocked. The door opened. The apartment was small and looked like tension had been living there for years. Furniture pushed slightly out of alignment, a cracked picture frame on the wall, the kind of disorder that accumulates when a household is held together by stress instead of stability. A young black woman, mid-20s, stood in the kitchen doorway. Her left cheek was swollen and her lower lip was split. She had the look of someone who was trying very hard to seem calm and was not quite managing it. 2 children, a girl around 6, a boy around 4, were pressed together in the corner of the couch, silent, watching everything with wide, careful eyes. A man stood near the far wall, arms crossed, jaw set, stinking of whatever he had been drinking since at least noon. He was bigger than Marcus had expected, and he carried himself with the specific confidence of someone who was accustomed to being the loudest person in every room he entered. Marcus stepped between them without hesitation. He moved the man to one side of the apartment, put physical distance between him and the woman, and started doing exactly what his training had taught him. Speaking calmly, taking notes, creating safety before anything else. He addressed the woman directly, made sure she could see his face, made sure his voice stayed even and clear. You're safe. I'm here. Tell me what happened. She was just beginning to talk when the door opened behind him. Pierce walked in. He scanned the room. Woman by the window, man by the far wall, Marcus in the center, and then looked directly at the man and said, in the most conversational tone imaginable, Everything okay here, man? This officer giving you any trouble? Marcus stopped mid-sentence. The whole room shifted. Not physically. Nothing moved, but the air changed. The way air changes when something invisible but very real walks into a space. The man by the wall straightened up. His shoulders came back. Something in his posture that had been slightly uncertain a moment ago became solid again. The woman by the window went quiet. Pierce, Marcus said. His voice was flat and controlled. Just checking the situation, Pierce said, hands in his pockets, the picture of casual. The situation is under control. The victim is the woman. She file a formal complaint? She's giving her statement. Pierce nodded slowly and moved to stand against the wall. Arms loose, gaze drifting to the ceiling, posture communicating. I'm just observing. I'm not doing anything. Which was technically true. He was not doing anything. He was just being there. Being there in a way that gave the man in the room permission to feel like the complaint wasn't serious. Being there in a way that made the woman feel like maybe this was not as safe as it had seemed 30 seconds ago. Marcus finished the protocol. He documented every detail, timestamps, descriptions, the children's presence, the physical evidence, the woman's initial statement. He wrote the report that same afternoon, immediately after the call, while every detail was still sharp. 2 days later, the woman withdrew her statement. Marcus sat in the patrol car after his shift ended, engine off, and stared at his hands on the steering wheel. He knew exactly what had happened. He had watched it happen in real time, but he could not prove that Pierce's presence in that room had influenced her decision. He could not prove the connection between the shifted atmosphere and the withdrawn statement. He could not prove any of it, and that, he thought, is the whole entire point. isn't it? He opened his notebook, wrote the date, wrote Pierce's name, wrote what had happened, word for word, with timestamps. Then he drove home. Day 15 arrived with a different kind of test. Marcus was on foot patrol along Clinton Avenue, solo, part of the community engagement program Captain Davis had launched 3 months before Marcus arrived. The program was simple. Walk the neighborhood, talk to residents, build the kind of trust that is impossible from behind car windows. Marcus genuinely believed in it. These were his people, his streets. It was the reason he had requested this precinct. He was outside a corner grocery, nodding to the owner through the window, when a precinct car rolled up to the curb 20 feet ahead. Randy Schultz got out. 2 teenagers were standing near the grocery entrance. Both black, both around 16. Both wearing hoodies. Both doing absolutely nothing except eating chips and existing on a public sidewalk. One was shorter, with a bright orange backpack. The other was tall, easy 6 feet already, wearing red sneakers that probably cost more than Schultz's last 3 lunches combined. Schultz walked toward them with the energy of someone who had already made a decision before he got out of the car. "Hey," he called out. "Identification. Let me see it." The tall kid with the red sneakers looked up. Not aggressive, just clear. The look of someone who knows their rights and is deciding whether to bother. "On what basis?" he said. "Don't get smart with me." Marcus was already moving. "Schultz." He stepped into the space between the officer and the 2 teenagers, keeping his voice even. "What's the basis for the stop?" Schultz turned. Something flickered across his face. Irritation fighting with something else, something less certain. "Suspicious behavior," he said. Marcus looked at the 2 kids, looked at the chips, looked back at Schultz. "They're eating snacks outside a grocery store," he said. "That's not suspicious behavior. That's a Tuesday afternoon." He turned to the teenagers. "You're good. You can go. You don't have the authority to. I have exactly the same authority you do." Marcus held Schultz's gaze steady and direct. "Specific grounds for the stop, Schultz. What are they?" The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. Schultz got back in his car without a word and drove away. The 2 teenagers stood there for a moment, watching the car disappear around the corner. Then the tall kid turned to Marcus. His expression was complicated. Relief mixed with something older, something tireder than a 16-year-old should have to carry. "Thank you, officer," he said. "You don't have to thank me," Marcus replied. "That's how it's supposed to work." He paused. "But do me a favor. Write down the time and location of this stop. Just for yourself. Keep a record." The kid looked surprised, then nodded. Marcus watched them walk away and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The afternoon was gray and cold, the kind of November cold that settles into your bones if you let it. He wrote in his notebook, Day 15, Clinton Avenue and 238th, Schultz. Unlawful stop. 2 black male minors, no stated grounds. 3:22 p.m. That evening Hoffman found him in the corridor, not in the locker room this time, in the hallway near the back stairwell. The kind of location that is quiet without being completely private, which Marcus recognized immediately as a deliberate choice. "Coleman." Hoffman fell into step beside him, hands behind his back, voice low and almost friendly. The almost was doing a lot of work. "You understand that what you did today put Schultz in a difficult position?" "Schultz stopped 2 minors without legal cause," Marcus said. "I corrected the situation. Schultz was doing his job." "Which job, specifically, are we talking about?" Hoffman did not answer that. He looked straight ahead for a moment, then said, "Just something to think about," and peeled off down a side hallway. Marcus stood where he was and thought, no, that was not a suggestion. That was a warning. The next morning the schedule had been updated overnight. Marcus was assigned to the night shift, alone, without a partner, covering the precinct's highest incident area. This was a direct violation of the internal safety protocol, which required 2-officer coverage for late-night solo patrols in that zone. When Marcus raised the issue with the desk officer on duty, the response was a shrug and 11 words. "Partner called in sick. It happens sometimes. You'll be fine. You'll be fine." Said by a man who was not going to be anywhere near that street at 3 in the morning. The night was cold in the specific way that late November in the Bronx is cold. Not just temperature, but something in the air that feels deliberate, like the city itself is testing you. The streets were quiet. Too quiet for the neighborhood's usual rhythm. Marcus walked them anyway, methodical, alert, the way he had walked patrols in places considerably more dangerous than this, and come back from all of them. He knew the feeling crawling up the back of his neck. Veterans know it. The sensation of being observed from a direction you cannot locate. Not paranoia, a calibrated awareness that something in the environment is not random. He kept walking. At 3:07 a.m., a call came through the radio. Armed individual reported in the alley behind Monroe Street, between 241st and 242nd. Address confirmed. Marcus responded. He arrived in 4 minutes, approached the alley correctly, angles checked, flashlight controlled, radio contact maintained. The alley was completely empty. Not quiet and possibly dangerous empty. Empty, empty. No one had been in that alley recently. There was no disturbance, no sign of presence, nothing that suggested the call had been based on any real observation. Marcus checked the address 3 times. He was in the right place. He contacted dispatch and waited 12 minutes, for a response. "Probably a coordinate error," the dispatcher said finally. "Happens sometimes." Happens sometimes. Marcus stood alone in a dark alley in the middle of the night, and understood, with complete clarity, that someone had sent him there on purpose, not to find anything, to put him somewhere isolated, alone in the dark, where anything could happen and the official record would show only that he had responded to a call. He took out his phone and photographed the alley, timestamp visible. He documented the exact time of the call, the exact time of his arrival, the exact time of dispatch's response. He wrote a full incident report in the front seat of his car before he drove anywhere, every detail locked in while it was fresh. When he finally got home at 5 a.m. and sat on the edge of his bed, Marcus Coleman did not feel afraid. He did not feel angry. He felt something much colder and much more useful than either of those things. He felt absolutely certain. The morning after the alley, Marcus walked into the Riverdale precinct in full uniform and his MIGA cap. Pierce saw it and, for the first time, did not laugh. He just turned deliberately to face the opposite wall, like the cap was a light source too bright to look at directly. Marcus tucked the cap into his locker when he put on his duty hat. Exactly as the uniform code required, not a second before, and walked into the morning briefing. Captain Davis was at the front of the room. He watched Marcus come in, find a seat, and settle. His expression was one Marcus had been studying for 2 weeks, without quite being able to decode. Somewhere between professional respect and something that looked faintly like concern. Like a man who sees a building under stress and is still deciding whether to call an engineer or just hope the structure holds. Marcus opened his notebook to a fresh page and wrote the date at the top. Day 16. The war in silence continued. And Marcus Coleman was no longer just surviving it, he was cataloging it. Day 32 was the day Marcus Coleman learned that the most dangerous attacks never come from the direction you are watching. He had spent nearly 5 weeks preparing for Hoffman, for Pierce, for Schultz. He had documented their moves, cataloged their patterns, built a paper trail that could survive a courtroom. He was ready for whatever they threw next. He was not ready for Captain Davis to call him into his office on a Friday morning, close the door quietly, and place a single sheet of paper on the desk between them. "Sit down, Coleman." Marcus sat. He picked up the paper. It was a Form DS-14, official internal complaint, submitted the previous afternoon. Initiating officer, Craig Hoffman. The language was precise and bureaucratically airtight. Officer Coleman demonstrates a consistent pattern of insubordination, creates hostile tension within the unit, and shows a persistent disregard for chain of command authority. Beneath Hoffman's signature were 4 witness signatures: Pierce, Schultz, Ward, and then the 4th name. Marcus read it twice, because the first time felt like a misread. Lieutenant Carla Simmons, 50 years old, 22 years on the force, 3 commendations, the first black woman ever promoted to lieutenant rank at this precinct. A career that Marcus had respected from a distance since his first week. Someone who had survived in this building through a combination of exceptional work, and he now understood a very specific kind of careful navigation. "Lieutenant Simmons signed this," Marcus said. His voice came out flat and controlled, which took more effort than he wanted to admit. "She's the 4th signature," Davis confirmed. The room was very quiet. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. Davis folded his hands on the desk. "Protocol requires an internal review. During the review period, you're moved to administrative duty. No patrol, no community contact. Paperwork only." A pause. "Review takes up to 6 weeks. 6 weeks. 6 weeks with no patrol meant 6 weeks away from Clinton Avenue, from Raul Estrada's grocery, from the people this neighborhood actually needed someone to show up for. 6 weeks that would push him past the formal timeline for his probationary period, putting the next phase of his career entirely at the discretion of the same people who had just filed this complaint. And at the end of it, if the review found against him, an official reprimand in his permanent file. The kind that closes doors quietly, from a long distance, for a very long time. Marcus stood up, took the paper, thanked Captain Davis in a voice that gave away nothing, and walked out. In the hallway, he passed Hoffman. They made eye contact for exactly 2 seconds. Hoffman looked at the floor, but at the very edge of his mouth, barely there, almost imperceptible, something moved. The ghost of a satisfied expression on a face that had spent 42 years practicing how not to show satisfaction. Marcus kept walking. Outside, he sat on the precinct steps in the November cold and called Tyrone. They filed a formal complaint, internal review, administrative mode starting Monday. Names? Tyrone's voice had gone into full attorney mode, quick, precise, no energy wasted on sympathy. Hoffman initiated, Pierce, Schultz, Ward as witnesses. Marcus paused, and Carla Simmons. Silence on the other end. The specific silence of someone recalibrating. Simmons, Tyrone repeated slowly. Coleman, that is not an accident. A black female lieutenant signing a complaint against a black male officer removes the racial dynamics from the surface of the document. On paper, it looks like a straight performance issue. That's not a coincidence. That's a strategy. I know. Do you know why she signed? Not yet. Find out. Because if she was pressured, if someone threatened her position to get that signature, that completely changes the legal character of this complaint. Another pause. How's the folder? 41 pages and a recording you called gold. Then we're not done, not even close. Tyrone's voice dropped half a register. Trust the system you built, Marcus. Stay the course. Monday morning arrived gray and cold. Administrative duty meant a small room with a desk, a computer from approximately 2016, and a glass partition that looked out onto the main floor of the precinct. Marcus could see everything, the briefings, the coming and going, the rhythm of a working day, without being part of any of it. It was, he suspected, an intentional design choice. Pierce walked past the glass partition 3 times in the first 2 hours. Each time he looked straight ahead. Hoffman came in twice on official business, professional and perfectly courteous, which was somehow the most unsettling version of him Marcus had encountered yet. Ward, Kevin Ward, 27. The man whose blank signature had helped build the complaint against him, avoided the partition entirely for the first 4 days. Marcus noticed the avoidance the same way he noticed everything: logged, filed, meaning assigned. On the 12th day of administrative duty, the door opened. Lieutenant Carla Simmons walked in and closed it behind her. She sat down across from Marcus without preamble and looked at the desk between them for a long moment. She was a composed woman. 22 years in this building had made her extraordinarily good at controlling what showed on her face. But something in her posture that afternoon was different. The careful architecture was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. "I know what you want to say," Marcus said quietly. "You don't," she replied. Just as quietly. A pause. "Hoffman came to me 3 days before the complaint was filed," she said. Her voice was level, but it had the quality of someone reading from something they had been carrying for a while. "He told me there was a case from 2019 that could be reopened, an incident review that had been closed in my favor, but which, if someone decided to look at it again with fresh eyes, could be characterized differently." She stopped. "I have 3 years left before I reach maximum pension." 3 years. Marcus sat very still. "He used that against you," he said. "He made sure I understood what the alternative looked like." "Lieutenant Simmons." Marcus chose his words carefully. "What he did to get your signature, that's coercion. That's a separate offense from anything in this complaint. If you documented it, if I were 20 years younger, I would not have needed 30 seconds to make this decision." She looked at him directly for the first time. The weight behind her eyes was substantial. "I have spent 22 years in this building. I have earned every single rank on this uniform. I have watched this place very carefully and learned which battles have doors and which ones are just walls. And this one—" A long silence. "This one," she said finally, "I may have already lost. I'm just not sure yet which direction the losing goes." She stood up and walked out. Marcus sat alone in the small room and thought about what she had just handed him. Not a confession, not an official statement, but something real. Something that revealed the full shape of what Hoffman had constructed. A complaint with a black woman's signature on it, obtained through a threat, designed to look like objective consensus. He picked up his phone and typed a message to Tyrone. "New development. Lieutenant Simmons. She was coerced into signing. Not ready to go official, but she told me directly. Hoffman threatened to reopen a 2019 case against her. The response came back in 8 minutes. That is coercion to manufacture a false complaint. That is no longer just a labor dispute. Call me tonight." Marcus put the phone down and looked through the glass partition at the precinct floor. Hoffman was at the far end of the room talking to someone from the scheduling department. Relaxed, comfortable, the posture of a man who believes the outcome has already been determined. Marcus opened his notebook to a fresh page, wrote the date, wrote Simmons, coercion, 2019 threat, and underlined it once. Then he kept writing. The Office of Civil Rights Investigation took 11 days. Faster than Marcus had expected. Slower than he wanted. Every single one of those 11 days felt like standing at the edge of something enormous, while everyone around you pretended the ground was level. He was not invited to the meeting where the findings were announced. He found out it was even happening from Tyrone. A text message arriving 1 hour before it started. "They're meeting right now. Davis, Department Leadership, City Legal, sit tight." Marcus drove to a coffee shop on Jamaica Avenue, ordered something he did not taste, and sat with his phone face up on the table the way people sit with phones when they are waiting for news that is going to change something. The place was warm and loud around him, a group of older men at the corner table arguing about baseball with the absolute conviction of people who have been having this same argument for 20 years. A mother with a stroller trying to get a toddler to stop reaching for the napkin dispenser. A teenager with headphones bobbing slightly to something only he could hear. Normal Tuesday morning in the Bronx. The world completely unbothered by the fact that Marcus Coleman's entire professional future was being decided in a room he was not allowed to enter. His phone rang at 11:23 a.m. Captain Davis. Marcus picked up on the first ring. Coleman. Davis's voice was flat and even, giving away absolutely nothing, the vocal equivalent of a poker face that had been practiced for 30 years. Come in. That was it. 4 words. No tone. No indication of which direction this was going. All right, Marcus thought, dropping money on the table and standing up. Here we go. Davis's office felt different the moment Marcus walked in. Rachel West was there. First time Marcus had seen her outside her own building on Pearl Street. She looked exactly the same as she did in her office, composed, precise, the kind of person who brings the same energy to every room, regardless of what that room contains. Beside her sat a man in a dark suit Marcus did not recognize. Mid-50s? No badge visible? The quiet authority of someone accustomed to being the most consequential person in rooms where nobody knows his name. Tyrone had mentioned a deputy commissioner for internal affairs. Marcus filed the connection without showing it on his face. Davis gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sit down, Officer Coleman. Marcus sat, folded his hands in his lap. Waited. West did not do preambles. She opened a folder, looked at it once, and began talking. The investigation conducted by this office over the past 11 days has confirmed systematic violations of departmental conduct standards at the Riverdale precinct. Her voice was level and factual, like she was reading weather data. The violations are attributed to 3 officers, Craig Hoffman, David Pierce, and Randy Schultz. Marcus kept his expression still. The violations include deliberate interference with incident reporting procedures, coordinated workplace harassment of a probationary officer, an unauthorized solo night assignment in violation of internal safety protocol, and, most significantly, the fabrication of a formal DS-14 complaint using a false witness signature. She looked up from the folder. Officer Kevin Ward has provided a recorded statement confirming that he signed a blank document under the representation that it was a routine administrative form. That statement, combined with the audio recording obtained by Officer Coleman on day 26, establishes deliberate intent beyond reasonable doubt. The man in the dark suit had not moved or changed expression since Marcus sat down. West continued. As a result, Officer Craig Hoffman is suspended immediately, with formal notice of disciplinary proceedings initiated as of this morning. Officers Pierce and Schultz are transferred to separate precincts, effective end of this week, with official reprimands placed in their permanent files. Officer Ward receives a formal reprimand, reduced in severity, in recognition of his cooperation with this investigation. She closed the folder. The complaint filed against you, Officer Coleman, is declared null and void. Fabricated under coercion, constructed with false testimony, filed with the intent to terminate a probationary officer's career without legal cause. A pause that lasted exactly long enough to give the words room. Your administrative assignment is lifted, effective immediately. Your record reflects none of it. The room was quiet. Marcus looked at West, then at Davis, then back at West. Is that everything? He asked. Davis and West exchanged a look. Brief, communicative, the glance of 2 people who have already discussed what comes next and agreed on how to present it. No, Davis said. He opened a second folder on his desk. Thicker than the first one. He did not read from it. He looked at Marcus directly, which felt deliberate. Officer Coleman, Hoffman's suspension creates a vacancy in shift command at this precinct. In light of that vacancy, and in consideration of your documented performance over the past 32 days, 7 complete incident reports, the Turner case resolution, community engagement metrics that are, frankly, the highest we have logged in this precinct in 3 years. The department has put forward your name as a candidate for shift commander at Riverdale. Marcus did not move. Not a single muscle. He sat completely still and let the sentence land the way serious sentences deserve to land. Fully, without rushing to react. Davis let a beat pass, then added, "To be clear about what that means, Hoffman would have reported directly to you, if he had stayed." The silence in the room after that was a completely different kind of silence than anything Marcus had experienced inside this building over the past 5 weeks. Not the manufactured quiet of a briefing room where his words were being deliberately ignored. Not the tactical silence of a corridor conversation designed to intimidate. This was the silence of something having actually changed. Something real, shifted, permanent. "Do I need time to consider?" Marcus asked. "That is entirely your right," Davis said. "No." Marcus looked at the captain directly. "I accept." When Marcus walked out of Davis's office, the main floor of the precinct was running its normal mid-morning rhythm. Desk officers on phones, the scanner going in the background, the smell of that burnt coffee that apparently came with the building's original construction and would outlast everyone in it. Pierce was crossing the floor toward the equipment room. He saw Marcus come out of the captain's office, registered the expression, or rather the absence of one, the particular stillness of a man who has just received news he was completely prepared for. Something moved across Pierce's face, the beginning of a question he was not sure he wanted answered. Marcus looked at him once, nodded, the way you nod at someone in a hallway. Brief, neutral, the acknowledgement you give to a person who exists in your general vicinity. Then he kept walking. That escalated quickly, he thought. Or rather, it de-escalated, which honestly hits harder. Schultz was at the other end of the room. He saw Marcus, clocked Pierce's expression, and seemed to understand from those 2 data points alone that something had gone extremely sideways for their side of this situation. His eyes dropped to his desk. Marcus walked through the main floor of the Riverdale precinct, the building that had smelled like burnt coffee and calculated hostility on the day he arrived, and felt for the first time since day 1 like his feet were exactly where they were supposed to be. That evening, Lieutenant Carla Simmons caught him in the corridor after the late briefing. She was in her jacket, keys in hand, clearly on her way out. She stopped when she saw him. For a moment they just stood there. 2 people who had been on opposite sides of the same document, in a situation that neither of them had fully chosen. "I heard," she said quietly. "Yeah." She looked at the floor for a moment. When she looked back up, her expression had something in it that Marcus had not seen from her before. Not the controlled composure she wore like armor through every professional interaction, but something underneath it. Something that had been sitting there for a long time. "I owe you an explanation," she said. "You don't," Marcus said. "Hoffman threatened to reopen a 2019 review, one that was closed in my favor. He implied that with the right framing, the right timing, it could be reopened in a way that—" She stopped. "I have 3 years left on my pension, Coleman. 3 years." "I know," Marcus said. "Tyrone figured it out." She nodded slowly. "I should have pushed back anyway. You were put in an impossible position by someone who had been running plays like that for years. That is on him, not on you." Carla Simmons looked at him for a long moment. With the eyes of someone who has been in this building for 22 years and has seen enough to know the difference between someone who means what they say and someone who is performing the meaning of it. "You're going to be good at this job," she said finally. Not as a compliment exactly, more as an observation, a fact she was stating out loud because it was true, and she thought it should be said. "I intend to be," Marcus replied. She gave him a single nod and walked out. Marcus drove through Riverdale after his shift that night. No particular destination, just moving through the neighborhood the way he had moved through it his whole life, knowing which corners had good light and which ones didn't, which blocks got loud on Friday evenings, where the old men played dominoes on folding tables when the weather allowed it. He drove past Raul Estrada's grocery, past the elementary school where his mother had given thousands of flu shots to thousands of kids over 23 years, including one 9-year-old who had been convinced the experience would finish him off. Past the park on 238th, where the Saturday basketball games ran until you couldn't see the court anymore. He thought about the tall kid on Clinton Avenue. Red sneakers, that complicated expression, tired in a way that 16 years old should not yet be tired. He hoped that kid had written down the time and location of that stop, the way Marcus had told him to. He hoped the next time a patrol car rolled slowly past, the calculation that kid ran in his head was a slightly different one than it had been before. He drove home, sat at the kitchen table, called his mother. Dorothy Coleman picked up on the second ring, which meant she had been waiting, but was too dignified to pick up on the first. "Tell me," she said. So Marcus told her. Not every detail. She did not need every detail. She needed the shape of it, the outcome, the answer to the question she had been carrying since the night she called him at 3 a.m. and told him about his grandfather Joseph and the factory, and the choice that had eaten a man from the inside for 30 years. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Shift, Commander," she said. "Yes, ma'am." Another pause. He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, and in that breathing was 22 years of school nursing and single parenthood, and watching her son walk into every hard thing he had ever faced and come back standing. "Your grandfather would have liked to see this," she said. Her voice was steady, but just barely. "I know. He always said the door exists. He just never trusted it enough to look for it." "I looked," Marcus said. "I know you did, baby." A breath. "I know you did." After he hung up, Marcus sat at the kitchen table for a while, without turning on any more lights. The folder was on the table in front of him. 53 pages, 32 days, one audio recording, one cartoon folded into quarters that had started all of it on day 1. He did not open it. He just looked at it. Then he stood up, walked to his desk, and took out a fresh notebook. Opened it to the first page. Wrote the date at the top. Not an incident report this time. Not a timeline of what had been done to him. Something different. A list of things he was going to do differently in this precinct. Starting Monday. Starting with the community engagement program Davis had launched 3 months ago, which had been running at half capacity because nobody in leadership had actually cared whether it worked. He wrote for an hour. The list got long. Outside, Riverdale kept doing what it always did. The neighborhood breathing and moving and carrying its weight, the way it had been doing since long before Marcus Coleman was born, and would keep doing long after. The corner store on Kingsbridge was still open, its neon sign throwing red light onto the sidewalk. Somewhere on 238th, a car alarm went off and then stopped. A couple walked past the window below, talking over each other the way people talk when they are comfortable enough not to take turns. A neighborhood full of people running their daily calculations, deciding whether to wave at the patrol car or look away, deciding whether the officer on foot patrol was someone you could actually talk to, or someone you needed to navigate around, making those decisions so automatically, so constantly, that most of them probably did not even register anymore as decisions. Marcus closed the notebook. He thought, somebody has to be here for those people. Not just in a uniform, actually here. He had been here for 32 days and they had done everything in their power to make him leave. He was still here, and starting Monday his name was on the door. Imagine walking into a new job on day one, giving everything you have, and the very first thing waiting for you in your locker is a hand-drawn cartoon designed to tell you that you do not belong there. Most people would have walked straight back out that door. And honestly, no one would have blamed them. But Marcus stayed, documented everything, kept his head level when anyone else would have lost it completely, built a case out of patience and discipline, while people around him were betting he would crack. So here is the real question. What would you do in his position? Would you walk away and protect your peace? Would you fight back immediately and risk everything? Or would you do what Marcus did? Stay quiet, stay sharp, and let the evidence speak louder than any argument ever could. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like the whole system was working against you? Has anyone in your family, a parent, a grandparent, a friend, ever faced something like this at work? How did they handle it? Because the truth is, Marcus Coleman is not a fictional character to a lot of people watching this. He is somebody's father, somebody's son, somebody they know personally. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of someone real, share it, because the more people see it, the more the conversation grows. And the more the conversation grows, the harder it becomes to pretend these situations do not exist. Hit that like button if you believe that doing the right thing, even when it costs you, is always worth it.